Hey everybody, today we are back with another deck from the 2004 format, and that is going to be Crobat-Gorebyss. Now, this has been, in my opinion, one of the bigger surprises in the format. On the surface, it doesn't look like the strongest deck, but it's ended up winning the last two 2004 tournaments, the first one being James, from James Arnold, and then the second one, we did get coverage of the last 2004 tournament that was won by Jack with the deck as well. So today we're going to be taking a look at James's list, Jack's list, and then at the very end I'm also going to show what my current list for Crobat-Gorebyss looks like. Is this the new best deck in the format, or was it just a strong metagame call for the two tournaments that ended up being won by it? So I'll let you guys be the judge of that, but let's get into the deck and start breaking it down. So the main strategy of the deck here, and I guess before we go too far, we're starting off with James Arnold's list. He won the first 2004 tournament, I think, back in July of last year. And James had a lot of really great innovations with the deck. He had a lot of really great ideas with the deck that I, not only do I really strongly agree with, but I've actually used and implemented in other of my decks as well. But essentially, what the strategy of Crobat-Gorebyss is, regardless of list, is Gorebyss is just an all-around good attacker. Mystic Water does 20 damage plus 10 more damage for each Psychic Energy in play. Now, we can fill that very easily with Double Rainbow Energy, Multi-Energy, and then, of course, Psychic Energy. And the idea is it's for all energy in play. So, first off, this does include your opponent. So if you're playing against an opponent that plays Special Energy like Double Rainbow or Multi, those are also going to add to your damage, or if you're playing against a deck like Gardevoir that just plays Psychic Energy in general, that's going to add to your damage. On top of that, and I think one of the biggest, or the strongest factors of Gorebyss is the fact that it only requires 2 energy, but it can hit for massive damage. So you'll hear me talk a lot about, when I'm talking about playing, is diversifying your energy. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. And what you can do with Gorebyss is a Gorebyss with a Double Rainbow Energy can hit for incredibly good damage while you keep the rest of your energy spread out among other Pokemon on your board. This means that if your opponent is able to knock out a single Gorebyss, it's not going to be detrimental to your deck or your strategy. Now, going along with that, Crobat seems like a very interesting partner, because on the surface we don't see a whole lot of synergy here. Now, of course, Gorebyss is going to be really good. Not only is it hits for major damage, it has an attack that could possibly paralyze. It's also a water type, which is outstanding against the ever-popular Blaziken deck. So, while Gorebyss is very clearly good, Crobat's going to seem like a little bit of an unusual partner. But what Crobat does, and James explained it to me, is kind of a twofold process here. First, Crobat gives you a partner for Gorebyss where you can basically park your energy. You know, if you need just something on the bench that you can attach a Double Rainbow to, you can attach a Multi to, you can attach a Psychic to. Now, that may seem a little redundant, but the fact of the matter is you do need a second attacker with Gorebyss. You can't just play a straight Gorebyss deck. You've got to have something that's able to partner with it and then try to cover some of Gorebyss's weaknesses. And Crobat works really well for that. Crobat has a great Disruption attack and Flutter Tricks. And Flutter Trick, flip a coin of heads, choose a card from your opponent's hand and discard it. Now, I want to emphasize that Flutter Trick discards. This is major. It's not a shuffle it back into your deck. So if you hit a Rare Candy, an ATM Rock, a Desert Ruin, something like that. I guess Desert Ruins isn't too big, but Rare Candy, ATM Rock, let's even say a Blaziken EX or something like that. The card is just gone. It's discarded. Your opponent is not going to be able to draw back into it or search it out with an Oracle or something like that. It is discarded. And to be honest with you, that's a pretty big distinction when it comes to actual gameplay. Now, the second attack is going to be triple poisoned. The defending Pokemon is now poisoned. Put 3 damage counters instead of 1 on the defending Pokemon between turns. While that might not seem very strong in general, due to a lot of Pokemon having lower HP in 2004, essentially if you put 3 on them at the end of your turn, if they don't retreat out of the active spot, they're going to take 3 more at the end of opponent's going to take 3 at the end of their turn, and then 3 more at the end of your next turn. So essentially, if that Pokemon does not leave the active spot, they're going to be taking 90 damage from poison. This is almost certainly going to result in either a 1-hit knockout by the poison alone, or a 2-hit knockout, being able to follow up with something on your turn to knock it out. Essentially, best case scenario for you is that you're going to be using triple poison, and then some combination of Flutter or Trick on your turn to try to take a sneaky knockout that way. But you can easily retreat back to a Gorebyss or something else and take a knockout with that damage as well. And it is incredibly strong against EX decks. If you think about Rayquaza EX, Blaziken EX, Swampert EX, cards that they want left in the active spot. And even as we were casting that 2004 tournament, we saw just how detrimental that could be to Shiftry, where Crobat's able to triple poison it. Shiftry, it's hard for Shiftry to get a 1-hit KO on Crobat, and it's very awkward for Shiftry to get out of the active spot. So triple poison is just a very, very annoying attack that might not seem very strong on the surface, but in terms of actual gameplay, it's incredibly difficult to play around. Now, on top of that, Crobat also gives you free retreat. I think this does come up a decent amount. It's worth mentioning. The Psychic weakness is basically offset by the fact of how strong Gorebyss is against Psychic decks. And then, while 90 HP seems low, it usually is going to result in a 2-hit KO regardless. So, it's one of those things where I don't think the synergy is incredibly obvious between the two, but when you actually see the deck play and the deck perform, you really start to see how they kind of offset weaknesses, and they play really well together. So, starting off here, we're just going to note a couple things about James's list. And a lot of decks that I prefer, or a lot of decks that I feel drawn to, are always going to be, just in general, are going to be very consistent decks. And in 2004, consistent decks are usually revolving around the Delcatty Magneton engine. Now, Crobat-Gorebyss does not play that engine. It's too hard when you're trying to play special energies like Double Rainbow, Multi-Energy, to come up with 8 additional spots to fit in Delcatty and Magneton. It really just does not work with the deck. Not to mention how difficult that would be for bench space and stuff like that. So something that you'll see from James, and I like a lot, is he does play a lot of bumped up counts on his cards. So you'll see 4-4 Gorebyss, 4-3 for Crobat, his supporters, 4 Stevens, 4 Shaman, 4 TV Reporter, 4 Master Ball. He plays all these cards, 4 Double Rainbow, 4 Multi. They're all played in copies of 4 because he knows he's not going to have that consistency with Delcatty. He needs to be able to draw into the cards in his deck reliably, and playing the higher counts on them plays much better in the scenario. You don't see a whole lot of 1-ofs or 2-ofs in the deck, just for that consistency. Now, something else that James said, and I agree with here, is you see a lot of decks from 2004 with Gorebyss. They play a 3-3 Gorebyss line to try to find room. And one of the things that he said he did purposely on this tournament is he bumped it up and played a full 4-4 Gorebyss line, because he goes, I know Gorebyss is good, and I figured if I play more Gorebyss than the opponent, I stand a better chance of winning. And honestly, he's right. I think, and I guess the way that I'm going to phrase this is, playing 4 Gorebyss does not win you the mirror, but not playing a 4-4 Gorebyss line can certainly lose you the mirror. So, starting off here, we'll do a quick rundown here. 4 Dunsparce, Strike and Run. It's incredibly important, especially in a deck like this, that you don't play those consistency engines. You want to be able to thin your deck out as quickly as possible. Now, a strategy that we saw a lot that Jack used at the last 2004 tournament, and I think is incredibly important for the deck, is if you put a Psychic or a Multi on Dunsparce, and he Strike and Run, he would switch back to a Clamperl. Now, rarely do we see people switching with Strike and Run, but in this deck, it's very important to switch off the Strike and Run, because if you switch to a Clamperl, and let's say they have Dunsparce active, if they try to paralyze you, you can just retreat. You can just evolve out of it and then free retreat, because Gorebyss has that free retreat. Now, I have found, I would say about 80% of the time I strike and run. If I know I'm not going to strike and run on the following turn, I literally just switch out to a Clam Pearl to protect the energy on the Dunsparce. That energy is essentially, you need to view that energy as 10 damage, and if you have to retreat it, you're going to be losing 10 damage over the course of the game off every attack. This is a pretty major deal, so keep that in mind. 4/4 Gorebyss. We do play the Clam Pearl with Exoskeleton. Any damage done Clam Pearl by attacks is reduced by 10. There's a lot of bench damage in this format, so it is really important to have that Exoskeleton body. Something you're going to see from a lot of decks, or against in certain matchups, you're going to want to make sure that you don't actually evolve the Clam Pearl into Gorebyss until you're absolutely ready to. Against things like Blaziken and Exploud, you don't want that bench damage building up on Gorebysses, especially if you're expecting an ATM rock to come. So keep that in mind and try to keep the Clam Pearls unevolved until you're ready to actually attack with the Gorebyss. Games aren't always going to play out like that, but it's a useful strategy. Now, for the 4/3/4 Crobat line, I'm going to say the Zubat and Golbat aren't anything super impressive, but they're also not bad. Quick Turn is alright, but mainly Surprise. Just getting that random card out of your opponent's hand can be huge. We have, I've seen games where you get a turn 1 Surprise, a turn 2 Crobat Flutter Trick, and you're able just to completely decimate the opponent's hand and just win off some of the more general inconsistencies of the format. Golbat, once again, nothing incredibly, crazy, but the Supersonic Attack, the Automatic Confusion, I do think is good. I also think it is very useful against certain decks and in certain situations. So definitely not something I'd underestimate. And then, of course, the Crobat we have covered. Essentially, you want to Flutter Trick as often as you can, but never give up a knockout to Flutter Trick. If you can get a knockout, always take the knockout. Also, if it's a better situation to triple poison, always triple poison. Flutter Trick is mainly just reserved for those situations where it's essentially a very key Flutter Trick. You absolutely have to get that heads to stay in the game, or to prevent your opponent from doing something, or B, you're going to get a knockout regardless. Maybe that's on a weaker Pokemon, or maybe they're going to get knocked out due to triple poison. But never pass up a knockout to use a Flutter Trick. Yes, it's incredibly strong, it's incredibly disruptive, but it's never worth passing up the knockout on. Now, for Steven's advice is too good not to play. Absolutely go ahead and play 4 copies of it. Basically, any deck in 2004 should be playing 4 copies. Now, this one's a little unusual to me, but James played 4 copies of Desert Shaman. And his logic for it was that he said when he plays 4 copies of Desert Shaman, the idea is to try to put your opponent off of the switch or warp points that could get them out of the triple poison. So essentially, if he feels his opponent has a switch or warp point in their hand, he's going to Desert Shaman, and then when he goes ahead and triple poisons, hopefully they weren't able to get it back. The downside is James doesn't have any sort of consistency engine in the deck. So when you're playing Desert Shaman in a deck without a consistency engine, you need out of those 4 cards in your draw for next turn, so 5 cards, you absolutely have to hit another supporter to keep chaining those supporters together, where a deck that plays Delcatty Magneton cares a little bit less because they're just going to be able to magnetic fields and energy draw regardless if they drew a supporter in those 5 cards or not. So I do think decks that don't play those in-game consistency cards or in Pokemon consistency cards, Desert Shaman is a little bit weaker of a card. For TV Reporter, it's just good, draw 3 cards. It's not great, but it's also not the worst supporter in the world either. Helps you burn through the deck. It also helps you discard dead cards like extra copies of Dunsparces or Desert Ruins in certain matchups, things like that. So you are going to be more likely to draw a better hand off the 4 cards for Desert Shaman. 4 copies of Master Ball. Absolutely love this from James. And what you see is he plays such bumped up lines here. Master Ball always has a much better chance of actually hitting something you want to hit. Maybe that's a Gorebyss, maybe that's a Dunsparce, maybe that's a Crobat, Zubat, Clam Pearl, whatever. But just playing the thicker lines is going to increase your odds of hitting something you want to off Master Ball. But on top of that too, Master Ball is just a normal trainer card. So it's great to you can burn it to get your hand down for Steven's advice. It's great to play it and try to, get a Pokemon or something, and then Desert Shaman, get a new hand out of the deck. Basically, it's just really easy to play. It's not the most reliable. It's not going to be as reliable as, say, Professor Elm's training method, or in certain situations, Friend Ball. But the problem with the deck is water and grass are not the most common types, so you're not going to get a whole lot of value out of Friend Ball in a lot of matchups. And then on the same note too, Professor Elm's training method is a supporter, so that's not going to get you. It's going to be a little bit slow for a deck like this. Master Ball is just a great fit, and you're going to see this in a lot of my decks that don't play Delcatty Magneton. I've really come to enjoy, or really come to like Master Ball. I think it was a great addition to the deck, and playing the full 4 copies of it here. 3 rare candy. I think you can make an argument to drop a Golbat here and then play a bumped up candy line and go like a 4-2-4. James did prefer that extra Golbat. I think probably part of the reason was going to be the Master Ball counts here. 2 Desert Ruins. This is something I'm going to say James also really popularized, but essentially, a lot of EX decks in the formats are not playing, 3 or 4 counter stadiums. Most are playing 0 counter stadiums. So essentially, if you have a Desert Ruins or 2 Desert Ruins, as soon as you find that Desert Ruins, it's going to stick in the format, or it's going to stick against most decks. Now, going along with that too, it's also great in case your opponent does play stadiums you want to bump. For example, like that Machamp deck we featured earlier. I guess if like an Ancient Tomb, I guess that's maybe a bad example. Let's say the Swampert deck that I featured that plays an Island Cave, and you absolutely have to bump that Island Cave. That can be really hard for Crobat-Gorebyss, so the Desert Ruins would be able to bump that. 1 Copycat. I'll be honest, I think this is a little bit low for the deck, but the line of thinking comes from the fact that you're playing 4 Desert Shaman, so essentially you're going to try to keep your opponent at a lower hand size, so you're not going to be able to get as good of a Copycat off as you would against other decks in the format. 1 copy of ATM Rock. I, once again, am not a huge fan of ATM Rock, but splashing a copy of ATM Rock just seems to be a standard for basically a lot of decks. If you have a spot open, play ATM Rock. There's a little bit more to it than that. Obviously, ATM Rock is a very solid card, but it just seems to be kind of the go-to one of when you have the room for it. 4 Double Rainbow Energy. Combos incredibly well with Gorebyss. 4 Multi-Energy. Obviously, be careful of the combination of Multi and Double Rainbow Energies. Don't attach Multi to a Pokemon with Double Rainbow Energy or vice versa, because you'll shut off your Multi-Energy. And then 6 Psychic Energy. All of these are going to add, all 14 energy are going to add damage for Gorebyss, along with the energy from your opponent's side of the board as well, if they play anything Psychic, Double Rainbow, Multi-Rainbow, etc. So that's going to go ahead and be James's list. I think it's absolutely an outstanding list. I think he made a lot of, innovations with the deck that we're going to see carry over into Jack's list, and we're going to see carry over into my list. But as I don't want to drag this video out too long, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here, and then we'll jump into Jack's list. All right, we'll jump into Jack's list here. And you can tell right off the bat that Jack took a lot of innovation from James Arnold's list. I think in total, Jack's list is only maybe 7 cards off from James's, but I do really like some of the changes that he made. The biggest one here is he played a full 4 copies of Steven's Advice and a full 4 copies of Copycat. And I think to fit the extra copies of Copycat in, he lowered the Desert Shaman and TV Reporter counts to 3 each. I think this is a great addition. I think this is a great choice as well, but essentially it's saying, hey, I still want to try to put you at a low hand size, still try to put you off those switch and warp points, but at the exact same time, if you do draw well off that Desert Shaman, you get a Copycat off, maybe it's earlier in the game, you get a huge Steven's Advice off, something like that. I do want that Copycat to take advantage of your large hand size as well. I really do like that addition to him. And then he also, the other changes he made to the deck were he bumped up the energy line by 1. I don't hate this either. I think playing that extra energy, it gives him 11 energy drops for the first turn of the game. You do need to keep in mind the Double Rainbow Energy. While it is an energy card, it's probably one of the best energy card in the deck. It is not a turn 1 energy drop. So if he's opening with Dunsparce or just wants to get that turn 1 energy down, Double Rainbow is not going to work in that situation. So this gives him 11 other energy drops. I don't know how I feel about the 2 grass. I think I still would have gone 6 Psychic and maybe 1 grass there. But I don't hate this either. And then He added a copy of Warp Point. Absolutely loved that copy of Warp Point. I think that was a good addition. If you watch the videos where we cast his games, you'd see that there was a lot of games where either that one Warp Point came in handy, or there was a lot of situations where if he had that Warp Point, he either would have won the game or been able to get out of a really key Dunsparce Paralysis flip or something like that. All around, I'm really liking this choice in the deck from him. Now, I am going to talk about some of the things that I don't like, or I'd say the two things that kind of caught me a little off guard, and that's going to be the two copies of Rare Candy. I don't think this is a good addition to the deck. I don't think going that low is a good idea. He did play a 3-2-3 Crobat line, so I think his line of thinking is the smaller Crobat line would warrant the smaller Rare Candy. I think I still would have kept 3 Rare Candies in here. I like the 3-2-3 Crobat. I think this is fine. I don't hate the 4-3-4 Crobat, but I do the 3-2-3 Crobat to make addition space for the extra supporter, and then like the Warp Point. I totally agree with that choice. I think that's a good addition. I would have just kept the 3rd Rare Candy in there. I really do think that's impactful enough in your consistency to see early Crobats and to see Crobats more often that I would have kept the 3rd Rare Candy in there. I think there is a small argument to even drop a Golbat to either make room for the 3rd Rare Candy or drop the Golbat to make room for a 4th Rare Candy. I shy away from this argument because it's nice to have a place to put your double rainbow energies that are not susceptible to ATM Rock. And a Crobat that has evolved up through Golbat is going to be a safe place for those double rainbow energies, where a Rare Candy Crobat would not be. So I probably wouldn't drop the Golbat line any lower than 2, but that is something you could do. The other thing that I was not a huge fan of in the deck was the Town Volunteers. I find Town Volunteers just to be a little too slow in a deck that doesn't play the Delcatty Magneton engine to then make a follow-up play that turn after playing the Town Volunteers. You're also playing such thick lines in the deck, mainly the 4-4 Gorebyss, that the Town Volunteers I don't think is going to be impactful enough in games. And we saw that through his tournament run. The Town Volunteers was okay, but I don't think there was any game where we were like, oh wow, that Town Volunteers, that just won him the game right there. It's not a bad card, I just probably wouldn't play it for the space. But all in all though, a lot of credit to Jack for basically looking at James's list, seeing how that list ran successfully, what made that list successful, and then taking some of that innovation, but also coming in with your own ideas and making some of your own changes, and then turning around and winning the tournament with it. Now, I like this list a lot. I'll be honest, I even like this list a little bit more than James's. I think what pushes me over the top is the fact the 4 Stevens, the 4 Copycat. I think those are just absolute essentials in the deck. Basically any deck in 2004. If you play 4 Stevens, 4 Copycat, I'm going to be on board with you. And then I also think the 1 Warp Point, I think that was a great addition to the deck. Those were the only things in James's list that I thought were missing, and that's something that Jack came in and then fixed when, I won't say fixed, but that's something that Jack played in his list that I'm a big fan of. So we'll go ahead and wrap up Jack's list here, and then we'll jump into my list. Lastly, we're going to take a look at my list for Crobat-Gorebyss. Now, I'll be upfront with everybody and say that for my list, I borrowed incredibly heavily from both James and Jack. I took what I liked out of both of their lists, and then just changed a couple of cards around here and there for my personal preference and what I thought would play a little bit better. The one thing that I did change in the deck that I am really proud of is adding this 1-1 Banette line. And Banette is, in my opinion, one of the best kept secrets in 2004 right now. And I'm going to be talking about it in this video and talking about it probably more in the future. So I expect I expect to see it a lot more in the meta. But essentially, what it does is it does 10 damage plus 20 more damage for each special energy card in your opponent's discard pile. A lot of decks in the format are starting to play more and more and more special energy cards. So, essentially, and where this really comes in handy is, in this in mirror matches in particular, it acts as a 5th copy of Gorebyss. I agree a lot with James that the more Gorebyss you play, the better your mirror match is going to be. And essentially in the mid to late game against opposing Gorebyss decks, Shadow Steel is going to hit 470 damage and knock out an opposing Gorebyss. In the mirror match too, it also hits Crobat for weakness, so if they have 2 special energy cards in their discard pile, it's going to hit for 100 damage, or 50 damage double to 100 and knock out a Crobat. It is exceptionally good in the mirror match, which, once again, if this deck won the last 2004 tournaments, I'm going to say is a pretty good addition. And on top of that, it is very good against any other forms of Gorebyss. And basically against any deck in the format that has that plays a lot of special energy cards. On top of that, the weakness to fighting is almost non-existent in 2004, and the resistance to fighting is actually quite nice if we do run into decks like, say, Machamp, for example. Now, going along with this, other than that, I kept the Pokemon line essentially the same. I think this is just basically Jack's Pokemon line with my addition of the 1/1 Banette. Now, I like the 4 Steven's Ice, 4 Copycat. I had to play that. One thing I did switch up here is I played 4 copies of TV Reporter, and then I switched the Desert Shaman to 2. I'm not a huge fan of Desert Shaman in the deck due to the fact that we aren't playing any sort of consistency engine. So essentially out of the 4 cards plus the 1 draw, we have to find another Steven's Advice to stay in the game. And if our opponent is playing Delcatty Magneton, they're going to have a lot more options to draw out of bad hands. Or if we Desert Shaman at a relatively even board state and they find the Steven's Advice first, they're going to be sitting better. That being said, though, too, I also get the logic of wanting to put opponents down to smaller hand sizes, or if you have that read where they have the switch of Warp Point, trying to put them off of that. So we do still play 2 Desert Shamans, we just are relying more heavily on TV Reporter, hence the 4-2 split. I also bumped up the Rare Candy line to 3. I think that is absolutely essential for the deck. And then I did play 2 copies of Warp Point. I think, once again, Warp Point is incredibly key to the deck, and we saw that when we were casting a lot of Jack's games. In so many different situations, Warp Point either would have won him the game or continued to put him farther and farther ahead. Now, what I cut for those additions is I did cut a Desert Ruins. I don't have any issues playing 1. Not only is Desert Ruins only effective against about half the decks in the format, on top of that, most of those decks don't play stadiums. Until we get to the point in the meta where decks are actually playing stadium cards, I really don't feel a whole lot of incentive to play more than 1 copy of Desert Ruins. Even against those decks, like let's say we're playing against a Swampert deck that plays multiple Island Caves, the Desert Ruins still is going to act as a Strength Charm for a single turn. It'll still get me that initial 10 damage, which can combo with Gorebyss or Crobat or Banette to maybe get a key knockout at some point. And if our opponent doesn't play stadiums at all, well, it's going to stick, and I only need the 1 copy. ATM Rock, well, it is a very strong card. I just haven't been a huge fan of it, and I felt it would be more impactful to play the 2nd copy of Warp Point and then make room for the Banette line as well. I also went with James Arnold's Energy lineup here, just playing the 4 Double Rainbow, 4 Multi, 6 Psychic. I did not hate playing Grass Energy in the deck. I don't think I would have played the 5-2 that Jack played. I think I would have switched that and played a 6-1. But essentially, I needed to cut a spot to find room for the Banette. And that was the spot I cut. Other than that, like I said, I think James did a lot to really pioneer this deck. And I liked many of the card choices that Jack changed from James's list as well. So all in all, huge props to both of those players. Congratulations on winning your respective tournaments. And like I said, I took from my list, I took mainly what I liked out of both of their lists. But the one thing that I do think is going to see a lot more play in the meta is going to just be Banette. I think it's really strong right now. I think it's good against a lot of top decks. And one other thing that I did not mention that I think makes it so strong is the fact that you can put some serious damage on the board for a single Psychic Energy. You don't have to find the Double Rainbow. You don't have to attach multiple energies to it. Just for a single Psychic Energy, you're able to hit for some really, really good damage numbers in the mid and late game. So I'd expect to be seeing this a lot more. Ironically enough, I actually went through and bought all of the cheap copies off TCG Player before I made this video, just to make sure I had mine and the price didn't skyrocket like SKR Ditto did. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.